Hello, I'm Dr. Andrew Sargent. Welcome to my course, 101 Most Misunderstood Verses. We're coming to you today from Sacred Fire Church in Bellevue, Florida. Come on by. So you always got to keep that in mind. Science is for sale as long as scientists are for sale, and scientists are always for sale. They're for sale to ideologies. Like right now, what's happening in the medical community, what's happening in the psychological community, what's happening in earth sciences is, even in anthropology and archaeology, is beyond a travesty. Because critical Marxism rejects science. It believes that scientific methodology is oppression, and that the ways of human knowing should not be bound to things like facts. And so now you've got medical journals saying, just don't know whether a person's a male or a female. Archaeologists, well, we found some skeletons and we just don't know if they're male or female because they're not alive to ask. Never mind the hip structure. Never mind everything else that we know about male and female skeletons, because we have to reject. So you're dealing with people that they're just for sale, and they'll say anything. And it's always to find the pristine scientist, to find the person that's willing to talk honestly. So like right now in molecular biology, there are a lot of molecular biologists that are really ready to go. Nothing Darwin said makes sense. That's not how cells work. No, now, yeah, now, yeah. So what we see.
What the satellites are, what the telescopes are seeing in
So
space.
if we're wrestling, I do, like, as we've been talking, I don't hold to using a scientific model to read Genesis. Genesis is pre-science. That does not make it stupid. It means that it operates on different principles, asks different questions, and answers those questions in a different way than we who are more scientifically minded will. I don't hold to this idea, that science is the only way to know about the world, or that science is the only way to discover anything. In fact, science is a very highly limited process for examining the physical world. It has no capacity to examine anything beyond the physical world. And so now, if you are a philosophical materialist, right, which means you don't believe there's anything but material, there's nothing but matter, then science is the end of human knowledge. If it can't be established by science, people say things like, "Do you believe in ghosts?" I am a man of science. And I'm like, yeah. So do you believe in ghosts?
What does that have to do with that?
What does saying I'm a man of science have to do with it? I'm a man of science too. I've seen spirits. Well, no, because if you're a man of science, you have to deny that spirits exist because you have to limit yourself to the physical. No. That is philosophical materialism. That is not the same thing as science. When I do science, I limit myself to what I can know materially, but it is not the be-all and end-all of human knowledge. Now, that's different than in critical Marxism, where they actually reject science as a model because they believe it's an oppressive system used so they reject it as being colonial. So it's colonizing. Science is colonizing. It is to discredit the knowledge of other people. Of course, that's not really the case, but it doesn't matter if it's not the case. They reject everything. They reject anything that's a norm. They don't believe in norms. They want no norm. There's no right, there's no wrong, there's no male, there's no female. There's nothing that you can say about the world that should be definitive for anybody except yourself. And if it does not decree an open society or lead to the creation of open society, it should be rejected. So sexual morals are oppression.
So you just have a bunch of people walking around going,
Well, the processes are always different than the goals. What their long-term goal is not what they claim their goal is. They'll always claim that they're attempting to do this, but they actually have something else going on. So I have a family relative who's that way. They'll do something completely crazy, and if you try and talk to them about it, they will throw you reason after reason after reason after reason for why they're doing what they're doing. And the only thing you're sure of is that if they tell you it's one of the reasons they're doing it, it's not real. There's a whole other reason for what's going on, and that's not being talked about, will never be talked about, and will never be admitted. You're never going to get at the truth with them. So that's what you're dealing with when you're dealing with critical Marxism. They have a goal, they have a method, they want power, and they have a process for getting power. And critical Marxism is a very successful process for stealing power away from other people and accumulating it to critical Marxists. Now, what critical Marxists will do with that power is a whole other thing. So like we have people like Hillary Clinton who wants power, will say anything to get power, and what she says to get power has nothing to do with what she will do when she actually gets it.
You mispronounced her name. Her name's Hillary.
Well, I mean, you have to admit, you got to go. You go. There is quite a body count. Anyway, so that's always one. So when you're looking at the outer space stuff, I mean, it's so huge. It's so. We have a poster. One of my professors had back when it was the Hubble telescope was the new thing. His entire door was a Hubble telescope picture. And it said, "O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth, you who have spread your glory upon the heavens." Right? That's what it says. Now, and then at the bottom, like that's what it says at the top, and it's got all the Hubble stuff. And at the bottom it says, "David didn't know the half of it." So the conversations that an evolutionist or anti-evolutionist want to have over the book of Genesis is a completely separate conversation. I believe should be a completely separate conversation. And the creationist sites that I listen to, I love when these guys are doing science, because a lot of them are scientists. Some of them are molecular biologists, others are space guys, and I love to listen to them talk. But then when they start touching the text, they're out of their field, and they need to back off, but they won't, which is a problem. I wish they would back off when it comes to the text. Let's just speak about the nature of the world. So what people are looking for when I say we don't want to apply a scientific model to Genesis is demanding that the Genesis story of the creation of the world talk like we talk, think like we think, ask the questions that we want answered, and answer the questions that we want answered. Having read all the ancient Near Eastern creation stories that existed technically before the book of Genesis was written, if we believe that Moses put it into its finalized form, whatever form it had before that as oral and whatnot is oral tradition is a different conversation. But as far as the penning of the story goes, there are many creation stories that exist around it. And I believe that Genesis is written to address the pagan world and to address pagan worldview. And so it's going to answer the questions radically different than all the pagan stories answer the questions. Starting with the fact that it's written in prose, which means just normal talk, history talk, instead of myth talk. Myth talk is everything is clouded in poetry, everything is clouded in fantastic images and imagery. So Genesis is going to touch those stories, borrow some of the imagery from them, but construct its story of creation in such a way that it gives a radically different answer about the nature of the world than the pagan stories do. So one of the reasons I want to call this reading Genesis like a pagan is because instead of reading it like a scientist, trying to demand that the story speak to me like a scientist and mean the things that a scientist would mean by those same statements, I let it speak in its ancient Near Eastern context. I let it be an ancient Near Eastern conversation. And it is an ancient Near Eastern conversation with all the ancient Near Eastern pagan people that are going on around it. So if a pagan picks up the book of Genesis, a person fully immersed in pagan mythology, fully immersed in pagan worldview, fully committed to pagan ritual systems, pagan conceptions of reality, and they begin to read Genesis, what are the hot points that melt them down? I mean, it starts in the first 3 verses. The whole world in the book of Genesis is different. The entire conception of God is different. The entire conception of man is different. The conception of time is different. The purpose of the world is different. Everything is different. And they would, if they were a person who were moved in faith by what they were reading, I'm looking for those points that their entire worldview would crack, break, and be replaced by something new. Like imagine you planted a seed under a cement patio, and it starts to sprout, and it starts to splinter that concrete. Next thing you know, you got an oak blowing up, and the concrete's rolling away. What are the points in the book of Genesis that when they hit them, their entire perception of the world cracks, splits, and starts to roll away? That's how I want to read Genesis. And so we've started. This is our 5th hour of conversion. Our first, I got into a elevator one time, and one of my professor's wives, who was a psychologist, and I had Converse from the shoes, Converse, and she goes up, she goes, "Converse, What shall we converse about? I look down at my shirt and I go, sneakers? All right, so we've been talking, if you want, for the sake of you guys, we can run through very quickly the major points that we hit. So one is recognize that Genesis is a portal to another time and place. This is not American literature. This is ancient Near Eastern literature written in the context of ancient Near Eastern worldview. It's speaking to those things, and so everything that we do, we must do within that context, and this is one of the big problems that Christians have with it. It's a sacred narrative. It's worldview proclaiming. It's wisdom literature. It tells us who made the world, why he made the world, what he made the world to become, how he made the world to function, and how we can function best within it. So it is a piece of wisdom literature. It's a piece of theology. It's not history like we think of history. It is history with a theological purpose. It is prophetic history. It is inspired history. It entails things that happen when there were no eyewitnesses to see them. The incredible distance between us and the writers, and between the writers and the things that they're even talking about, leave them falling to using metaphors and power images to tell their story. And that's really important, and we're going to get to that before this day ends. We're going to really look at some of the power images and what I mean when I talk about using metaphors and power images to tell a story, in which the story does not come out 100% straight as if I were reading Kings. It's not like Kings. Kings is based on witnesses and resources and prophets engaging the world that's actually there. This is stuff where we are reflecting back through the prophetic spirit upon things for which no eye was there to see but God's. All right. I think it gives the stories, it puts the stories in a different category of literature. You know, it's not Kings. It's not a gospel. It's something, it's history, but it's a kind of prophetic theological history that is going to demand some sensitivity to the images. So for instance, if the Genesis story starts telling you something that is counterintuitive to the physical encounter of the world. So Genesis 8:1-3. And God remembered Noah and all the animals that were with him on the ark, and God sent a wind to blow across the face of the waters, and the waters shakak, means became calm. Now the grammar is very clear. The rains are still flowing, the fountains are still pumping, but the water has been sent into an artificial calm by the sending of the divine wind against the waters. Now, this is a reflection of Genesis, where the waters of chaos have the Spirit of God buffeting against them, almost egging them on, calling them on to become something other than tohu vabohu, right? Where something other than hoshek, or darkness, is going to be born into the world. Everything in the created order is about to happen. So now here in Genesis 8. Now, the question we ask ourselves, God sends a wind, the waters become calm, the rains are still going, the fountains are still pumping, but God sends a wind and calms the waters. Does wind calm waters? No. Wind does not calm water. We know that wind does not calm water. They knew that wind does not calm water. They were on the sea. They knew what happened when the wind blows, and yet the story tells us that God sent a wind and the waters became calm. Now, this should make us go, huh? It's telling you. It's giving you a signal. It's saying to you, something else is happening here beyond your normal human experience. Now, what do we find in the story of Genesis? In the first 3 verses, God's going to say, let there be light, and there will be light. And it was morning, and it was evening, and the first day. So this light is creating morning and evening. If we want to think scientifically, that means that this light is coming from a specific place in a specific direction, because the spinning of the planet is creating night and day from a scientific model. And yet, the sun, moon, and stars are not made until day 4. So people say, well, God was that light. So what did he do? Act like a light bulb in outer space? Just one. I think the text is giving you a signal. It's telling you this needs to be read a little differently. It's kind of signaling, like it's as if you're telling the story and you went, All right, so I'm walking down the street. You know what I mean? All of a sudden, it's telling you. Now, remember, this is not me saying, I don't believe the text. I don't believe the text is inspired. It's me saying this is a prophetic story, and we need to get with it. We need to get with the rules of it. All right. So, with that said, let's look a little bit at Genesis 1-3. Let's read it first. We have some grammar, some serious Hebrew grammar reading issues in these first three verses. And since they are the first three verses of Scripture, I mean, we can say that some scriptures were written before this. For instance, pieces of the book of Job are likely older than this. There is the potential that certain Psalms are older than this. Some of the stories of the patriarchs from the oral traditions may technically have been older than this. If Moses wrote this, and I believe he did, I actually believe that when we talk about JEDP, if one wants to talk about this concept of a P, I believe we're looking at Moses being P. But anyway, that's a conversation for another day. So let's read it. King James Version. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, period. Who's the guy that gave sounds to all the punctuation marks? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Right? And the earth was form and void. What? And darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. All right. King James has a way of holding English translation prisoner. This is not me insulting the King James. King James was a magnificent work. Absolutely magnificent. The people who did their translations may have been a little weak in Hebrew here and there. They may have had inferior manuscripts, but they were masters of the English language, and we owe them a great debt for allowing people everywhere for centuries to memorize Scripture easily. Matter of fact, I bet you, even if you don't read the King James Bible, you still have most of your Scripture memorization from the King James. Yep. I read the King James sometimes, but that's not my primary. My primary has always been the New American Standard, unless I'm in actual original languages. I'm working with the New American Standard. 1970s version is my favorite. But most of my Scripture memorization, King James. All right, so that's one read. Now, it's important because it takes that first statement as in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, period, as opposed to alternate readings, and we'll see them. NIV. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, period again. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. Common English Bible. When God began to create the heavens and the earth.
Ooh.
Ooh. Is that a reflection of the Hebrew? Yes. It is a perfect reflection of the Masoretic, or the Hebrew scholars who preserve the vowel pointing of the Bible. This is the proper reading of what they wrote. And the King James Version is not a proper reading of what they wrote. Now we're going to talk about that because we're talking about a reflection of a tradition of reading. That gives us some pause for what the text actually says. The Masoretes, the Hebrew scholars that preserve the tradition of reading the text with the vowel points in it, that's the proper reading. It creates a circumstantial clause. It starts the story midstream. So when God is beginning to create the heavens and the earth is without shape and form, and darkness is over the deep of the sea, and God's wind is sweeping over the waters, and God said, let there be light, and so light appeared. Now, that's a very different thing. It's starting the story mid-story, because it's starting the story where the earth is already present, the water is already present, the Spirit of God is already present. It's starting the story there. And then God begins its creation with God taking the tohu vabohu, the empty void, the hoshek, the darkness, and beginning to change it to make a functioning world instead of a tohu vabohu, empty and formless and purposeless and unproductive, like that formless. It's not like it was just this gaseous thing and he brought it to solidity. It's this emptiness. It's desert is tohu vabohu. A barren sea, which is not producing anything other than fish, is tohu vabohu, right? So here this story puts it circumstantial. I'm going to start my story with creation. Now this begs our definition of creation. Some people will often say, and it is an incorrect statement to make, is that the Hebrew word for creation, for bara, means to create out of nothing. No, that's not what the word means. The word means to create. And it frequently uses the word bara when God takes one thing and reshapes it into something else. So creation, if the question you're asking yourself about creation is where did all the stuff come from, then you're going to try and force the word bara to mean the beginning of all the stuff. But this story doesn't start with the beginning of the stuff. It doesn't say God didn't create the stuff. It doesn't make that claim. It simply starts its story in which creation is not the making of the stuff, but the fashioning of the order. It's when an unordered, disordered world of chaos becomes a thriving, functioning world. That's creation. And every time something in that created order is radically changed so that the whole order is a little bit different, then that too is a creation. So that the creation of Israel the making of Israel is considered a creation. The world before Israel is a radically different thing than the world after Israel. The world before Jesus, before the church, is a radically different place than the world after Jesus. This is a new creation. This is a creation. The flood, the world after the flood, is a very different kind of place than the world before the flood. And of course, the people that are telling the story of Genesis, the people that are recording the stories, that are writing the book, they don't live in Adam and Eve's world. They don't live in the world before the flood. They live in the world after the flood. They live in the world after the giving of law. They live in the world after Nimrod and the Tower of Babel and whatever it is that happens with the people there as God splinters them in order to keep them from returning to the state that they were in that forced God to give the flood in the first place. So humanity becomes so monolithically evil in all of its thoughts, all of its intentions and everything, that he must disrupt the human process, wipe out that generation, and start afresh with Noah. But he doesn't want humanity to return to that place, and yet their heart remains in that condition. And so he gives them something to prevent them from going there, and that is law. He who sheds the blood of now. The difference between a command and a law is very important. When you get on in Exodus, that's no difference between a command and a law. But when you're looking at the first of the story, God tells them certain things. He makes certain ways of being in nature. But law comes into being when God begins to hold men accountable to hold other men accountable. Instead of God holding them accountable to commands, he comes in and says, you people are going to be held accountable to hold each other accountable. It is your business what your neighbor does. If what your neighbor is doing is destroying civilization, destroying society. We have medical facilities around the country that are taking small children, cutting off their genitals, cutting off their potential to even develop breasts, injecting chemicals in them so they cannot develop as human beings. And we're told that if we say anything about it, we're bad. And that they're the loving and kind ones, butchering these children, permanently altering their entire existence, and we're supposed to say nothing. Yeah. We're supposed to not judge. Yeah. Didn't Jesus say, don't judge? We're not going to judge. I won't judge. If you want to butcher children, you butcher children. If you want to go into abortion clinics and stick a tube into the throat of a tiny little baby and rip its guts out, and, well, I just wouldn't want to say anything about that because I wouldn't want to be judgmental. I just want to be loving toward the mama. She's got so many concerns and so much need. God says, I will hold you accountable. He who sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For man was made in the image of God. This establishes something in the earth that is designed to prevent human race from returning to the state that demanded the flood. Of course, the visions of the future in the books of like Revelation and Daniel and other things, they see a world returning to that level of evil. They see it going there. When I often wonder when Paul talks about he that restrains in the book of Thessalonians, he that restrains, that the world must go on this way until he that restrains and that which restrains is taken out of the way, and then the world just flows to that natural evil. And we've seen it in what they did in the Soviet Union and what they did in Germany in World War II, what they did in Cuba and with Pol Pot and Ho Chi Minh and so many of these totalitarian states. The mass butchers, where these guys come in and kill 25% of their own population. in order to get control, because they got this humanist vision for this beautiful utopia. Mao, who comes in, and I watched, I'm doing a course right now, and they're into the section of the Mao where they go, well, you know, some people say he murdered as many 20 million people. But as the guy keeps talking, he goes, well, of course there were the 10 million people that died here. And of course then there was the 40 million people that died there. And then there was the 30 million people that died. And so I'm like, why did you start with he murdered 20 million people? You just finished a list that's upwards of over 100 million people. Solzhenitsyn is putting the numbers, he does not agree with the numbers that are in the Soviet Union, where they're putting it up at 30 to 40 million. He's like, no. He goes, for everyone you know about, add 2, add 3, add 4. That's what was really happening on the streets. Children left to starve to death because daddy got arrested and mommy killed herself. And the children die and no one will take them in. He goes, you need to start adding to know what the real murder rate was. So we have the humanist vision for this glorious human utopia, this beautiful state that we can get in, if only we can murder enough people. There's this movie called Becoming Jane. Anne Hathaway plays Jane Austen, and it's about a supposed love of her life, a man that she wanted to marry, but he was inheriting from a very rich uncle, and if he did not inherit from this uncle, his family would starve. There was no means of taking care of the family, and he had forbidden this man to marry Anne Hathaway's character, playing Jane Austen. And they decide, he's like, I don't care. We're going to run away together. And while they're running away together, he tells her the real state of things. And she makes this statement, which I think is so powerful. How can any love prosper if it begins itself with the destruction of everyone else you love? And I'm like, how can your governmental system prosper when it begins with the murder of 100 million people? How can you even hope to... This? All right, let's read another one. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was barren with no form of life. It was under a roaring ocean covered with darkness. I love this one. They throw a but in there. But the Spirit of God was moving over the water. God said, I command light to shine. And light started shining. Young's literal translation. In the beginning of God's preparing the heavens and the earth hath existed waste and void, and darkness is on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God fluttering on the surface of the waters. And God said, let light be, and light is. Interesting. All right. Good News translation. In the beginning, when God created the universe, the earth was formless and desolate. Period. Interesting place. The raging ocean that covered everything was engulfed in total darkness, and the Spirit of God was moving over the water. Then God commanded, let there be light, and light appeared. You're getting the idea that this locked onto the King James, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, period, is not without question, not without doubt. And honestly, I don't know very many Hebrew scholars who actually believe that's what it says. And I know, so this is sort of the real Genesis. That's the real Genesis. So let's talk a little bit about this. So Hebrew has a history. So originally Hebrew was just consonants, and what you're looking at is the structure of Hebrew consonants. Now around the time of David, they started adding vowels. But they didn't use vowels to represent them, they used consonants to represent them. So if you say certain long vowels, like say the long vowel O, 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 where do you end? W, w, w. So they used W to represent long O. Let's try oo, oo. You end in a W, W, W. So they used the consonant W to represent the vowel O and oo. Now, if you say the sound E, where does it end? E, y, y, y. So they used y to represent the sound E, and a. Now A is long E, and E is long I. Isn't that fun? So E says A, I says E. Okay, so around the time of David, they started adding those little things to the text. All right, now, but what happens later, as time passes, is the rabbis are concerned that the tradition of reading the text, which i.e. the putting of vowels on it, will be lost. And because they're afraid it'll be lost, they actually write it down. And this becomes the Masoretic text. And what we have for the Masoretic text is that. All those dots, the dots, so you see the dots? The dot inside the letters, the dot below the letters, the double dots, the little dashes like that right there, the combination of dots there, the big dot over the letter there. I'm sorry, my hand's so shaky. The dots inside, the dots above, the dashes below, that dash, right? Now there's some other symbols on here that are canticle marks or singing marks. Like this is a singing mark, that's not a vowel. So I'm sorry, that's a vowel, that is a singing mark, that is a vowel, right? All right, so they add all these dots because they don't want to change the text. The text is what the text is, but they want to preserve the reading, so they developed a system of representing all the vowels by putting dots in them, dots or dashes in them, above them, or below them, or between them. So in them, between them, above them, or below them. In the entire system of marks, but they will focus on that. Now, here's the thing. The vowels, like Jesus has the text that he calls the Word of God, and it does not have those vowels in it. So then the debate comes, how seriously should we take the vowels? And I say this. They are not inspired, but I take them very seriously. It's like taking a serious scholar seriously. So N.T. Wright is brilliant. I take him very seriously. Do I always agree with him? No. But when I do disagree with him, I'm really careful because this guy is like nothing you've ever met in this world. I've met, maybe two people in my life. I can only think of one other person that I've ever met that could compete with N.T. Wright for the sheer brilliance of his mind, the speed with which he works and thinks and writes. I've never seen anything like it.
This technique they're using here versus the other one, wouldn't it simplify it for everyday people to read?
Yes. It allows more people to access the reading, but it's an interpretation. So I cannot read that. The minute I start to read that, I commit myself to an interpretation. Because if I put different vowels on it, I change its meaning. If I use their vowels, it means this. If I reject their vowels and put a different set of vowels on it, so in order for the King James to be right, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, I would have to have different vowels than that. Those vowels do not say, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Those vowels say, when God first began to create the heavens and the earth. And the earth was in darkness, and the earth was tohu vabohu, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was, love that word, this word right here, merachefet. That's a very rare word. That's the word where the one place you find it used is you've got this bird, and it's got a nest, and it's got its little hatchlings, and it's time for them to leave the nest. And it wants to get them out. And so they observe that these birds would come up to the nest to move on their young and go, woof, 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 and blow. One, it cleans the nest. But two, blows the little birdie out of the nest. And the little birdie goes, and if it looks like it's going to hit the ground, the bird flies underneath it and catches it, brings it back to the nest, and then whoo, whoo, whoo. So it's this concept of the spirit of the wind of God. Some people see it as it's beating against the waters, churning the waters. Other people see, because they're reading the story outside of the normal mode of scientific depiction, which is signaled in the day 1, day 4 issue, that what we're looking at here is not just a mighty wind. A wind of God could be a powerful wind. But this is that it's not the wind of God, not a God wind, like powerful, uncredible wind. Like we have this, what do we say? God-awful. Man, that was God-awful. And we stick the name of deity in our comparisons of things, and the Hebrews did the exact same thing. They connected something to deity to make an extreme example. Like, that city was great unto God. It's so great that even God thought it was great. Right? They have ways of doing this. And so a God wind could be the Spirit of God, but other people are trying to argue that it's a mighty wind, a powerful wind, a wind so powerful that it is divine, and it's just a wind that even God goes, wow, that's a wind. Right, so this Spirit of God is doing this marchefet, this buffeting. So what is it? They see it as raging and stirring the sea. Other people see it as the Spirit of God is, sometimes it gets translated brooding, like a mother on the nest, brooding over the waters, as if calling them forth to the next stage of they're out of tohu vabohu. Just like it's about to come out of darknesses and into light. He has called you out of New Testament. He has called you out of darkness into his glorious light. Is that this? Is that his reading, this understanding? Is that this the Spirit of God moving upon the waters? They're about to leave tohu vabohu as surely as they're about to leave hoshek, darkness. They're going to go out of darkness into his glorious light. And in this same moment, tohu vabohu is left behind. So in Isaiah, it's going to say, God didn't create the world to be tohu. He made it to be a flourishing populace. He made it to be a functioning world. It was never his intention and purpose. That means that there is an intention in the world, a purpose in the world, a direction for the world, and that God starts the story with tohu vabohu, but it is never his intention to leave it there, but to bring it on. All right, so this says, if you guys, I'm going to try and read it for you, if you just want to hear it, just for the sake of hearing it. And I apologize to all you smooth-talking Hebrew readers out there who grew up reading these texts. I will butcher it probably in your ears. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et ha'eretz ve'et ha'eretz haita. Okay. Tohu vabohu ve'choshek al pnei tehom ve'ruach Elohim marchefet al pnei hamayim. Vayomer Elohim yehi or ve'yehi or. That's the reading of it. So when you hear it, you go, I'm out of English world. So some people will be like, if you contradict the King James, they're like, you're changing the text. And I'm like, no, I'm actually trusting the Masoretes. This is the way they said to read it. And that, in Hebrew, is one long sentence that starts the story at the point in which the empty, unproductive world is brought out of the darkness into the glorious light of God to become functioning world. So what's the first act of creation? This is going to be the big point of this. What is the first act of creation? If the first act of creation is God made the heavens and the earth, or in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So in the beginning God made the heavens and the earth. A lump of dough, throwing it on the potter's wheel. It's not shaped yet. He made the heavens and the earth, and now he's like, all right, now let's turn this into something. Okay, that's so in which case some people take the first act of creation. Now remember, it's not creation, origins of the stuff. The first act of creation, origins of the stuff, is the establishment of the stuff. But is that the story that this book is telling? I don't believe it is. It's not telling our story. Our story is, where'd all the stuff come from? How old is it? How long did it take God to do it? What were the exact processes he used to make this world? That's our questions. That's what we want to know. And we want to know it because we're under assault by God-hating atheists who picture a world that's accidental and purposeless. And they keep thinking that if they just add more time to their equation, that it somehow is supposed to become more believable. Well, I didn't say it happened in 100 years. I said it happened in 100 billion. I mean, 100 billion. Yeah, but cells don't work that way. Yeah, but didn't you hear me? I said 100 billion. Yeah, but cells don't work that way. 100 billion, man. 100 billion. I'm sorry, saying 100 billion does not change the way cell structure works. Just doesn't. By the way, Darwin knew zero about cell structure, or very little about like the real intricacies of the cell. Okay? He was a very smart man for his time. He had a lot of experience in certain things, but he was also a very twisted, angry, hurt human being who was angry with God for the deaths and the losses that he had suffered in life, who refused to believe that there could be a loving God in heaven, who used systems like eating to build his world. I mean, these kinds of conversations he has. And worse yet, he refuses to believe that there's a loving God in heaven who would take his precious little angel away from him. Remember, science is for sale as long as scientists are for sale. And scientists are always for sale. And there's always a price somewhere. All right, so if we are to read this correctly as Beroshit, that be, right there, be, that's what that says, Beroshit. It means in the beginning of God created the heavens and the earth. That is the Hebrew way of saying when God first began to make the heavens and the earth. All right, so they have said that it's Beroshit. All right, if it had read Barashit, it would simply be in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. All right. So, when you are taking any language, you just simply recognize that in English, we have our subject, we have our verb, we have our indirect object, and we have our objects. Then we have modifiers. Modifiers can be adjectives, adverbs, or phrases or clauses that serve the role of these things. Every language does this, but every language does it in a different way. So, for instance, Hebrew starts with their verb. Then they move to their subject. If they don't start with their verb and move to their subject, there's something special going on, and you need to pay attention to what it is. Okay, so here are the two things. So we have the Baroshit, that little symbol is the long A. Bareshit, Bereshit. All right? So if it's Bereshit, it's a circumstantial clause. In the beginning of, God created the heavens and the earth. When the earth was formless and void, and darkness was on the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering above the waters, or buffeting the waters. If it is Bareshit, then it is the first act of creation, or an umbrella clause. Now here's an umbrella clause. I'm going to tell you about the beginning of God's creation of the world. Then the story starts in verse 2. So he said, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's what we're going to talk about today. The story starts. Now, the earth was formless and void. It's dark. So you imagine being around a campfire. A bunch of Boy Scouts. All right, boys. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth at that time was formless and void. Darkness was on the surface of the deep. But the wind of God was buffeting against the waters. And God suddenly says, let there be light. And there was light. That is an umbrella clause. I'm going to tell you, we're going to talk about God's creation of the heavens and the earth. The story then starts in verse 2 by setting the stage. Just think about it. The earth, it's waste. It's got nothing. There's no light. It's just water. And then God speaks into it. Boom, the story is beginning. All right, so circumstantial clause tells us directly that the first act of creation, meaning an ancient Near Eastern understanding of creation, not a modern scientific understanding of creation. Modern scientific understanding of creation wants to know about the stuff. Ancient Near Eastern creation wants to know about the function, about the order, about the nature of the world and how it was made to function. All right, so here are the three readings of Genesis 1:1-3. Genesis 1:1 is a standing sentence that marks the first act of creation, the creation of the raw dough, which begins to be shaped in verse 2 and gets shaped from verse 3 onward. All right? So the raw dough of verse 2 is created in verse 1, and in verse 3 it begins to be shaped. From verse 3 and verse 4 and verse 5 and verse 6, it's being shaped. The second reading of Genesis is that Genesis 1:2 is a standing sentence that forms an umbrella clause that is detailed in 1:2 following. So it's kind of like, it's almost like it's the title. Mm-hmm. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, let's pick up the story. So the earth is formless and void, and darkness is upon the deep, and the Spirit of God is hovering the waters, and God says, let there be light. So the story really begins in verse 2, and the first verse is an umbrella clause. Or the first verse is the first act of creation, which makes the rough dough that is being moved on by the Spirit in verse 2 and is shattered. The darkness is shattered in verse 3 with the light. And then verse 3, or the third way of taking it is that Genesis 1 to 3 is a single sentence that establishes light as the first element of order brought into a darkened and unproductive reality. And you go, how in the world are you going to make up your mind? Just do what I say. No, I'm just kidding. I relish people that want to engage the conversation. And I have friends that hold to any one of these three positions. It's not my fault they're idiots. I'm just kidding.
Well, my question is, and it's probably not the best time to bring it up, but why, what was happening before this? I mean, God doesn't create anything that's worthless and formless and void. So how did that worthless, formless, void stuff get there?
If I wanted to ask the scientific question, I would say that God starts to work. That, in other words, that creation and the origins of the stuff we're not told about. Obviously, God made it. We have it stated very clearly in Scripture that all that is was made by that which is unseen. You know, God made it all. This story starts midstream. Now, is it possible, remember, taking evolution to mean many different things? And I am not an evolutionist. I don't trust scientists, but I do trust the process of science to discover a material world if you can get enough philosophy out of the process to do honest research. But you have so if we have the creation of the sun, moon, and stars in day 4, and what we're talking about is an ordered world, the question would be, and if the world begins in utter darkness, then and if we recognize that we are not reading a science text, but we are reading a story about creation that is working on particular metaphors, then the scientific questions don't get answered in the text.
And also we're talking about the earth.
Yes, this story, yes. You have the stars and the concept of the stars, and I know that some of the guys that are working on this, they see what they see happening in the story, and it's something we were going to get to later, is that there are metaphors at work in the story. The story is told with power images. So we're going to have a serpent. Michael Heiser, he sees this serpent figure as a gatekeeping spirit according to the ancient Near Eastern conception of temples. So that there are temples and there are doorways and thresholds to the temples, and that there are these guardian spirits that keep the gates, and they are serpents. All right, so he's going to go with this is some type of a heavenly host figure who has taken on the form of a serpent, as opposed to being a little gardener snake. That we're actually drawing upon a power image. All of the ancient world understood two major power images of evil: the serpent, the great serpent, dragon, and the sea, the Tehom, from our story. Right? Tiamat, the great serpent dragon. Yam, other places called in Scripture given the name Rahab. Not she is probably named after this creature, but it's hard to know because you're jumping languages. You know, we have to know, did her name mean something different in, because you do have that. There's a lot of ancient tongues, and sometimes when you're jumping from Babylonian to Assyrian to Hittite to Egyptian to Hebrew to Aramaic, that there can be a little bleed over. So we have Ewil Merodach, right? In Babylonian, Ewil Merodach means man of Merodach. Merodach being Marduk, the great primary storm god deity of the Babylonians, right? But what Ewil Merodach in Hebrew means fool of Merodach. You can see how the word Ewil might come from man to mean fool, because it's man in his folly, man in his ridicule. So, but there's a shift of meaning. So the king who comes to the people of Israel, I am Ewil Merodach, and they all go, did your mother know what that meant in Hebrew when she gave you that name? This is great. Don't kill us. So you have Tiamat, which is the same word, but altered a little bit for Hebrew, which means Tehom, which is the deep, which is what's used in here. So you've got the presence of Tehom. Now here's the radical thing. in the creation of the world, that the Babylonians, according to the Babylonian creation stories, Tiamat, which is reflected in the word Tehom, is the great serpent, dragon, goddess of the sea. She is the sea, she is the serpent goddess, and she is the idol. They're all connected. So what the water is, the dragon is, the idol of the dragon is. If they can control the idol, they can control the dragon who controls the sea. It's all connected.
It's all satanic stuff.
Well, it's all pagan, yes. I mean, I would regard it as all satanic, yes. But in their mind, this is the structure of the world. All right, so, but what is the role of Tehom in Genesis? A great dragon goddess fighting against the god of the heavens, going to war? Nope. Just water. A pagan would lose their mind. It's just water.
So what you're telling her is the earth was originally water, and from that.
Yeah. So we have some conversations throughout Scripture that kind of reflect on some other things. The turning back of the waters to reveal the mountains, maybe the mountains rise. But according to this story, when God first begins to make a flourishing world, remember function, he's going to go from non-flourishing world to a flourishing world. Now, but what this hints at, which is going to be picked up elsewhere in Scripture, is that at some point God made the stuff. But we're not told about that. So did the stars come instantly into being on day 4? If we're sticking with our determination that what I'm reading in Genesis must be scientifically modeled, it must be, it has to be, I can't embrace it in any other way, then what you're looking at is the creation of light on the first day and the sun, moon, and stars on day 4, which would mean a spontaneous creation of all that stuff. You're talking about the telescope, the Webb telescope, the instant creation of all of that, with the light already shining. So I don't need that for myself. Not only don't need it, it seems, because I never want to say, this is not a science text. This is an ancient Near Eastern creation story that's preaching about the nature of the world, the nature of the God who made the world, the nature of man's role in God's making of the world. It's preaching a message about who we are, where we came from, what he's called us to be, how we can function best in the world, how our worship should look, and how we can become all the things that God made us to be. So I'm looking for the metaphor. One, we've got temple going. So we've got an image, right? The image. What's the word image mean? Idol. It's one of the words. There's 2 major words used for idol. This is one of them. We are God's idol. Well, you're like, wait a second. This is one of the places where the pagan's losing his mind, because they make an idol and they do an incantation over it, and they invite the spirit of the god into the idol to use it like a portal. So if anybody has seen the movie Annabelle, it's about a doll that gets possessed by a demon.
No,
and
I don't
begins
know.
to
I'll
torment.
never have a
Right.
doll in my
All right.
house.
Okay. Well, okay. I'm just saying, it's the exact same thing. In the story, these girls are playing with a Ouija board, and their mother bought them this doll from the market. And they're playing with the Ouija board, and something starts talking to them through the Ouija board, and it asks permission. It says it's a little girl, and it's lonely, and it's lost, and it needs a new mommy, and it never had a mommy. Can I come live in the doll and live with you? They say yes. And Annabelle well, at least in the original story, in the movies they take it in a little direction, then this thing just becomes a source of demonic power. The doll moves. The doll writes. The doll tortures them. They're crying out for help, and they seek some help from the Warrens, and the Warrens come, and they take the doll away, and they pray and cleanse and do all that kind of stuff.
That all makes sense to me, though. The original dolls were made to inhabit the spirit of the dead loved ones. So the whole history of dolls is just spooky.
Oh, my son used to creep out when a doll's eyes opened on its own. I had to get him to sit on the couch and hold the doll, pick it up, put it down, pick it up. It's just a marble. It's just weighted. It's not. Really, because he was so freaked out by them, I had to get him unfreaked out by them. All right, so
Go
ahead.
Jack, when you mentioned evil being represented by the snake or the serpent.
These are the two great images of evil in the ancient world.
That's one.
Yes.
And then the other one's the sea.
The sea itself,
Right.
yes.
So I immediately jumped to my mind, Revelation.
There will be no sea.
The beast. The beast coming out of the sea.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Chapter
There's a beast of the
13.
land and the beast of the sea. Yep.
I saw a beast coming up out of the sea having 10 horns,
Ah.
right, and 7 heads. Anyway, so
Yeah. So like we readily accept the fact that the book of Revelation uses mythic imagery to communicate its message. Nobody doubts that. But when it comes to Genesis 1, if I say the same thing about Genesis 1, that it uses power metaphors and power images to tell the story of the nature of God's creation of the world. In other words, I am telling you about the nature of reality. And we got science people want to come around and go, no. Tell me about the stuff. And the book's like, what? I wasn't writing about the stuff. Yeah, but I just want to hear about the stuff. Just tell me about the stuff. I got nothing to say about the stuff. Well, how am I going to learn about the stuff? I don't know. Go learn about the stuff. I'm telling you about the nature of reality. I'm telling you about the nature of the world. I'm telling you about who God is, who he made you to be, and how he made the world to function so that you can function well in the world that God made. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. Tell me about the stuff.
I've got the analogy, getting this vision of a car, and you want to tell somebody this is a car and this is what its function is and this is what it can do, right? And the guy goes, well, no. I want to hear about. Tell me how the camshaft is functional. How's it built? Well, that
wasn't a story I was telling.
Yeah.
Right? But it just you lose perspective of the big picture because you're going down to the minute.
Wait a minute. This thing uses gas. Where did the gas come from? Let's start with oil. Where's the oil come from? Antifreeze? Who made that?
Right.
What chemical plant? What?
Exactly.
I'm just trying to tell you a story about a car. Yeah, but I want to hear about the oil. I want to hear about the history of the oil. I'm not talking about that.
How many of you guys have been into Arizona?
I have not.
You
It's one of the places I've not
you
been.
see huge boulders just sticking up out of the ground. It's got layers of different forms of rocks. Or going to the Grand Canyon and you see layer after layer after layer. It's
Now, like we know from Mount St. Helens eruption, and of course, if you ever see those things that you could buy in the mall, where it's got sand and it's got blue sand, it's got white sand, it's got liquid in it, and if you flip it around, and it all comes down in layers. So we know that this can happen very quickly. I just watched it happen in 15 seconds with my little flippy thing. We know from Mount St. Helens that this kind of disruption, that the layers form quickly and naturally. It doesn't have to, there's not enough, nobody wants to acknowledge that anything in the scriptures could possibly connect with the reality of the world because they need 1 billion years to compensate for saying something that life came from non-life, that order came from chaos spontaneously, and they just excuse it with time. Yeah, but it was 1 billion years. Yeah, give enough time. Give enough time. They're always looking for those monkeys that are writing Shakespeare. That's all I want to hear about. So I'm not an expert in a lot of those things. I have some friends that are, and I love listening to them talk about this kind of stuff. And some of my friends are not sold on any of this stuff. They're just like, I don't think we're giving good answers to it. But what I don't want to do, and what I don't like it when the creationist guys do, is when they come to the text and they're going to force the text to be a science text. They're going to force the text. Now I hope I'm not upsetting anybody, because this is a lot to work through, and I've been working through it for decades and decades and decades, trying to work my way through to understand what's happening here in the text. But what I've come to as a biblical theologian is that I'm so desperate for what the text is saying to me, that what the Spirit of God led the prophetic hand that wrote it, and I believe that prophetic hand to be Moses, led that prophetic hand to say about the essence of the world that I live in, what my role in it is, what God's purpose in it is, and I don't need to know about the oil or the camshaft or the. Now that doesn't mean that I don't think we should look into those things, nor that I believe that what we call the scientific community is giving good answers. I don't believe they're giving good answers. I believe that they're trying to force a consensus. They always say, we have 100% consensus. Well, you always have 100% consensus if you fire everybody and defrock everybody that disagrees with you. Every licensed doctor agrees. because we took away the licenses of the people that didn't agree.
But the problem with science is it puts you in a box, and you have to keep a fluid mind, because we clearly don't understand everything about God and you have to keep your mind fluid.
So science is a methodology. That's it.
Yeah, it still sticks you in a box.
Yeah,
though.
well, but that's what I mean, because it's limited. Science is extremely limited. It's limited to the physical. Now, I think you can do scientific-like research, like let's suppose you wanted to study belief in ghosts and whether ghosts real. Are there scientific measures for ghosts? Thank you. Are there scientific measures for them? Well, so far they haven't really figured it out. They do have all kinds of things, electromagnetics and this and that. You have the visual, people actually see things, but then they just say, oh, it's in your mind. You didn't really see it. So me and my two brothers all saw the exact same thing from 3 completely different angles. So we're in a 25-foot long room. I'm in the middle. My one brother's all the way over there against that wall. My other brother's all the way over there against that wall. And we're both seeing the exact same thing from 3 different angles. There was no trick of light. We were seeing something. Oh, so you think we're nuts. Okay, maybe. But so it's not that you can't think scientifically. Like you can do statistics that are scientific-minded, but it's not science. His psychology is science. There are elements of psychology that are scientific, and the more scientific the psychology gets, the more boring it is. The more philosophical science that psychology gets, the more fascinating it is. But to be able to distinguish between philosophy and to know when you're doing philosophy and know when you're doing science, I think is important. But science is a methodology. It's not a body of doctrines, it's not a body of conclusions. It's a methodology. And when those people that are advancing science have completely thrown over the methodologies of science, they're not doing science. And so I took a course in the history of Darwinism, is what the course was. And the professor gets to the end of the class and asks the question. It was because it was a history of Darwinism, so it's supposed to be a scientific subject, and it's the history of that conversation and how it all took place. But he asked the class at the end, "How many of you think we've been doing science, and how many of you think we've been doing philosophy?" And he's like, "Yeah, you need to know when you've left one and start doing the other." So the professor, he says, "I'm convinced by Darwinism, but let's not pretend we were doing straight science. Doing an awful lot of philosophizing. Awful lot of beliefs and attitudes." And
There is a spiritual world. I mean, and there are spirits out there, and I think sometimes we get to see that.
mm-hmm.
And there's good spirits and there's bad spirits.
But if science limits itself to material and the ability to do reproducible experimentation, then our attempts to investigate that world can have certain processes that we learned in science, but ultimately leaves, because it's really hard to put that kind of thing in a microscope. It's really hard to have something that's reproducible. I mean, I've got incredible stories from friends who have had, unbelievable miracles. I've seen some pretty amazing stuff in life, but I've never seen some of the things that some of my friends have seen. And these are people that I trust and believe. They say, this happened to me. One of them was there was an accident, and they got out of their car. I was on the highway, and they got out of their car, and their car was sideways because it all spun around, and they were standing against their car, and all of a sudden another car comes speeding at almost full speed, and they're like, we were dead. It's going to hit us, and we're standing there. And it went over us. For the life of us, we couldn't figure out why it went up and over us. But it went up and over us. We cried out to God, and that thing went over us. And you can sit there and say, well, I can't reproduce that experiment. You're right, you can't. You can't prove it scientifically. But can you prove that Jesus rose from the dead? Well, no, not if you're going to require pure scientific investigations. But you have to recognize that that's not the whole of the world, and that's not the whole of truth, and that's not our only way of knowing. We have eyewitness testimony, and we know that eyewitness testimony psychologically can be unreliable in certain ways. But it's usually unreliable in points of detail, not in,
Magnitude.
did someone come in the room and shoot the person? One person said, no, I think he had bagpipes. Well, no. But what his shirt was wearing, exactly what stances were said, exactly what words were said, yeah, that might be a little fuzzy. But the fact that a person came in with a gun and fired that gun, there's not going to be anybody who says, I didn't hear any gunshots. I didn't see anybody. Professor simply sprouted red dots and fell on the ground for no reason. I don't know why. It's not that kind of testimony. And I know we're just blah, blah, blabbing here, but I am. All right. So this is the point that we want to recognize as we start launching into Genesis 3. We're going to want to look at that. How does a pagan read that? What kind of a God is this? A God of purpose, a God of intention, a God of spirit who's bringing order, that the created world, the stuff, is not warring gods and deities infested with spirits that are either for or against the Creator, but they are material forces that obey Him, that He creates with word, not like the other. Marduk creates with the Tablet of Destinies. And if he doesn't have the Tablet of Destinies because it's been taken away from him by Ira, he's like, I don't know. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Yahweh creates with the power of His word, the force of His holiness to bring about the entire ordered world. Did He create the stuff? No doubt. But that's not what Genesis 1 is talking about. And I don't believe that's what the first line of Genesis 1 is talking about. I think it's simply starting the story as the stuff that He already made at some other time, in some other way, that we're not going to talk about. He starts the story where He takes it and brings it to life and brings it to order. If you like what you're hearing today, please subscribe below, and don't forget to share it on as many platforms as you can, and tell your friends to watch. Thank you.